Monday, April 16th, 2018. To council for disclosure of pecuniary interest in the general nature thereof. Seeing none. Looking for approval of minutes from the March FSP meeting, moved by Councillor Freeman, seconded by Mayor Jaworski. All those in favor? That's carried. Moving towards consent motion, is there any item from consent any member of council wishes to remove from it? Seeing none, I'll look for a mover of the consent items. Councillor Freeman, seconded by Councillor Burke. All those in favor? That's carried. Brings us into staff reports. First item on staff reports is the Waterloo North Hydro Holding Company nominees and proxy, prepared by Julie Scott. So if there's any questions from council on this item, Councillor Maven.
Thank you, Chair Henry. Two questions. First of all, what is the current nominating process for the individuals before us for Hydro?
Looks to Mr. Anderson.
Through you, Chair Henry, the current nominating process is for the Waterloo North Hydro Holdco Board to undertake recruitment through a smaller subcommittee. They put forward candidates then to Waterloo City Council for consideration.
So just to make sure I understand completely, so the City of Waterloo nominees or appointees to the committee become the nominating committee?
The nominating committee, I believe, may be a mixture of City of Waterloo representatives and township representatives. I don't know that it's purely City of Waterloo people.
Okay. And those, any politicians on the nominating committee?
To my knowledge, I have not elected.
So there's one as a who's not a politician.
That's correct. Yes. Yeah. Woolwich does. Yeah.
Okay. So basically, this would be the bulk of the source of the nominating committee. Second one is on the terms of maximum terms of service from these appointees at WireCo. What is the maximum terms of length of service for members of WireCo, the Wires company below Holdco?
Through you, Chair Henry, I believe Wires Code does not have a term limit. I think that's my memory on that one, Councillor Maven. No term limit on Wires
Code. That's my memory too. Good. Thank you very much.
Okay. Looking for a mover and seconder. Moved by Mayor Jaworski, seconded by Councillor Freeman. Any further comments on this item? Councillor Maven.
Okay. A couple of things about this issue disturb me. Not the individuals. The individuals that I know here, and there's two of them that I both have enormous respect, both personally and professionally, for the individuals here that I know. But the process is there's basically Canadian history being what it is, a family compact. We've got a mini family compact here. That these people nominate themselves. These people appoint the members of the board of directors through WireCo, and waiving the policy for the number of years that a nominee can represent. I have problems. I don't have a problem with the nominee. I have a problem with the process and the fact that we're waiving a policy. If we waive a policy in this case, are we waiving it for everybody? And then why do we have a policy for? If we don't have 8 years for this committee, let's not have 8 years for anybody on anything. That's the one avenue. The other avenue is, since this committee nominates themselves, and that's what they're doing, they're nominating themselves, all we are is endorsing and approving. Isn't there time to do some either grooming or mentoring of replacements over 8 years? 8 years seems to be a sufficient time to do that. I don't know why we have to waive the policy. Policy's a good one. It's the only part that makes having them be the nominating committee work. Given that they're the nominating committee and they're the appointees, the only limit that they have is the policy that we've imposed where the maximum term is 8 years. and yet we're waiving that. We have enough, never mind that, that's a cheap shot. I'll back up for that one. I'll vote against this, not against the nominee, but I'll vote against the policy weighting. And I'm hoping the rest of council can do the same. If we're going to have all the members of the board of directors be one, and the easiest analogy I have is the family compact of the 1800s in Canada, where everybody appointed themselves, and it was a closed shop to everybody else. I think I've said enough for now. Thank you.
Any other comments from members of council? I'll simply add my anticipation of the particular individual to which Councillor Maven is referring and the particular waiving of policy that is being recommended. These do come back every year. I anticipate this is the only time for this individual on this policy, and there were particular circumstances at the board that the shareholder representatives, which are include 2 elected representatives around this table, felt was appropriate at this time given the particular issues facing the board over this near-term period, and that this would not be before council again next year. And that's where your shareholder nominees, including the elected officials, were on this item when it came forward. So with that, I'll look for, it's been moved and seconded. Heard no further comments. All those in favor? All those opposed? Councillor Maven. Next up is the 2018 general tax levy. So just the bylaw to confirm those items. I see Paul now sitting at his place. Senior mover and seconder on this item. Mayor Jaworski, seconded by Councillor Veith. Any questions? Staff seeing none. All those in favor? All those opposed? Councillor Freeman. Next up, we have the 2018 Business Improvement Area Levy, as already approved by the BIA Board and now before us to make sure it's on the tax roll. Moved by Councillor Durrell, seconded by Councillor Whaley. Any comments on this item? Seeing none, all those in favor? That's carried. Next up is the 2017 tax adjustments, which is an information item. Never a pleasant item, but an information item. Any questions from council on this? Madam Clerk, do we have to actually have a motion to approve receiving for information? Okay. I'll look for who wants the information. Mayor would like to move for information, seconded by Councillor Freeman. I know Councillor Freeman always likes information. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Yeah, one does hope that the trend has some change in it in terms of those long-standing big box issues who don't like paying taxes but love our services. Next up is the 2017 investment reporting, mandatory filing arising from the regulation. Any questions from council on this item? Councillor Whaley?
I have a couple questions on this item. First of all, for the last many years, since the early 2000s and until 2031, taxpayers are making payments on a regular basis for the RIM Park debt. It's been a real challenge for us for so long. And yet we have this RIM Park investment fund that is pretty robust in terms of the money in there. And I'd just like to get a clarification of what exactly are we doing with the RIM Park investment fund money? That's question one.
Kim?
Through you, Chair Henry, we make contributions to the RIM Investment Park Fund every year, and that goes into the fund to aggregate interest and to pay part of the lease debt every year. In the 2016 to 18 budget, we had requested a reduction in the contribution that was going into the RIM Fund because we knew that it was getting too high of a contribution, and that was done, and that has helped a little bit. What will eventually occur is we'll just contribute less because the fund is so robust, and then by the time it comes to like 2030, I think is when the fund can be drawn down to zero. So that is still the plan. We're not intending to collect more money than we need to.
So we collect money as an extra payment to the Rim Park that...
It's not an extra payment. It's a payment that I think it's all the interest on the actual debt that we're paying, and it's about $1.4 million that we have to pay.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. My next question is related to just the overall on the investment summary. It's on page 17 of the report, but I don't know. Page 97 of the council package gives us a total account of all of the investments, and it comes in at $167,270,000. That's a lot of investment money. I don't know why we need to have so much $167 million in the bank. What do we need that for?
Through you, Councillor Henry. These investments back up all our reserves. So these fund all our reserve activity. So these are all invested to generate interest to fund all our capital program that we have. So that's how we manage it. It's just not a general bank account. It's actual bonds and other investments that we're allowed to invest in through the Municipal Act that generate interest to help fund our capital program. So it's very necessary that we need to do this.
So you don't think it's every penny that's in there is covered off on a reserve fund?
Yes, yeah. But there's a bit more here than it's in reserve, but it's pretty close.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, any further questions on this little under 3% that we're able to accumulate while being very prudent in our investor status? Looking for a mover and seconder to receive information. So apparently that's what we're doing. Moved by Councillor Freeman, seconded by Councillor Leith. Any further comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. Next we have City of Waterloo contribution to New Hospice of Waterloo Region Development at 2050 University Avenue East. We have a presentation from Judy Nairn, Executive Director of Hospice Waterloo Region.
Thank you, Councillor Henry, and committee members. Thank you for allowing us an opportunity to present. I know that many of you are very familiar with our project, but we thought this might be a good opportunity to give you a bit of an update on where we are and to ask for some further support from City Council. As you'll notice from my opening slide, we are now officially known as the Geese Family Centre, Hospice of Waterloo Region, and our capital campaign as we move forward is There Is a Season. Just as a quick summary, and I won't take much of your time, I wanted to just review with you why we believe this project is so important, and especially so important to Waterloo. Hospice palliative care is whole person care. It relieves suffering and improves the quality of life for persons who are living with or dying from an advanced illness. And we also support those who are bereaved by the loss of a loved one. We are currently what is known as a community outreach hospice. We currently do not have any hospice residence beds, but we do have a professional staff of 25, and we have currently about 230 active volunteers who are providing care in the community. We serve individuals with an illness, we serve their family members, and we provide a lot of education to the general public and to the healthcare professionals. Last year, that was over 1,200 individuals with over 11,000 volunteer hours. And we do help people to optimize their quality of life, to be able to stay at home longer, to support their caregivers so that they can help support them at home longer, and to provide counseling for those who are coping with loss. And this is why we do this work. This is a chart of actual and projected deaths in Ontario between 1996 and 2036. So that slide was created in 2012, and we were there in 2012. We've now moved up the chart a bit, but as you can see, with our aging demographics and with our increasingly aging population, the number of deaths in Ontario is expected to increase significantly. per the provincial standards, there are currently only 16 residential hospice beds in our region, and we are about 20 beds short right now. And over the next 15 years, we know that the region will grow by an additional 209,000 people, a growth rate of almost 42% from today. So that boomer generation, which is rapidly aging in Waterloo region, will create by 2036 approximately 25,000 plus people over the age of 85. Those are all people who will be approaching end of life. And we need to be positioned well to be able to support them, and we need to start planning for that now. So our plan is to build our new center in North Waterloo, which will include expanded spaces for the services that we currently provide, plus a 10-bed residence for those who are ill and dying. Many of you know our new site is at 2050 University Avenue. This is the site. Well, actually, this was the site when we bought it a year ago when the barn was still on it. This is the site that we are hoping to have about 18 months from now. So our residence will be towards the back of the site, facing that lovely pond. We like to tell people we're on a lake, even though we're on a stormwater pond. And the back part of the building will face the pond and the natural area. The front part of the building, excuse me, which will be our medical clinic, our day program spaces, our education and administrative areas will face the roadway, which is towards the Wall Diamonds, if you know that site. The new facility will have over 50 people. We will be employing in the residence about 24 to 25 people 24/7. We will serve 200 individuals a year in the residence. We will support more than 1,500 with on-site programming and throughout the community. And we will bring with us from our existing site the palliative physician medical clinic that we currently house. It will be named the Geese Family Center. As many of you know, at the Mayor's Breakfast last week, we did announce a major gift from Bill and Gert Geese in the community of $2.5 million. We are here today to ask you to consider a $300,000 contribution towards the campaign to help us achieve this success. And we'd also like to request some in-kind contributions to help us offset some of the road work and the parkland costs as we get the site ready for participation. We also had I believe, no, I didn't include it, sorry. We did have a previous contribution from the region of Waterloo of about $250,000, and we have had a contribution from the Ministry of Health that they announced around $2 million. So we are on our way with the campaign, but we would like the City of Waterloo to be a big part of that as well. I'm happy to answer any questions if I can, or I'll get Bill or Laird to answer questions if need be.
Thank you very much, Judy. Appreciate the update, and certainly I know, for all of us, the announcement you were able to share at the Mayor's State of the City breakfast was very gratifying to hear, and I know very helpful to your cause, and in fact all of our causes, as your data is well showing for us. Any questions from council? I think we'll probably see some comments that might get made, so I'll just get this on the floor. Sure. Moved by Councillor Freeman, seconded by Councillor Burke, and I'll turn to Councillor Freeman.
Thank you, through you, Chair Henry. Thank you for coming today and providing an overview, and the contribution from the Geese family is beautiful, and it's an example of how the City of Waterloo, I think, comes together. I'm very excited, as you might imagine, for this to be happening in my ward, and I think that the contribution that Council is being asked to make today achieves a lot of things, because it's really a public building, and the build out of that site is going to create connectivity within my ward, and it's certainly it's going to create a beautiful place and space for people, and so I think that this is a great opportunity for us to demonstrate how important this build is to the City of Waterloo.
Councilor Burke?
Thank you for all the work that you do in this particular place, because it is, as you sit around this table for 3 or 4 years and you look at every planning thing and you look at every issue that you take care of, this is one that really matters. And having had people go through hospice care and see what you're capable of doing in there, the fact that we can do something concrete to expand that and bring it to the right place is a very, very good feeling. So thank you for the work that you do, and certainly hope that we're going to fulfill your expectations.
Thank you.
Next I have Councilor Maven.
And through you, Chair Henry, and I want to add my thanks as well. Bill Geese has always been a very class individual to deal with, and this just goes on and just shows how much class he has got. I also want to say hi to Bill Green when he came in. And Bill's done a lot of good work in the city too, and I see he's still active in it, so thank you for that too, Bill.
Mayor Jaworski, and then I'll go back to the mover.
Well, I think this is a great opportunity for us to rally around a project like this as a city. You look at many small-town Ontario communities, we're always facing the doctor shortage. They rallied around a medical clinic, and they'd come together and build a medical clinic to ensure they could entice doctors to wherever they were in small-town Ontario. And if you look at this as something that was completely missing from small city Waterloo, Ontario, of having real hospice care within our city borders, and certainly with the shortage of the hospice beds, as you noted, I think this is something that's just something we can really get behind. It's so complementary to our own property that we have there, including our beautiful stormwater management pond, which we'll probably have to give a name to someday. Pond 52, yes, we'll have to rename that. And I think this is just such a great opportunity for our council. And if we look back on our term of council, we've invested in affordable family housing at the YWCA on Lincoln. We invested in supportive housing at Show on Herb Street. And now we can invest in a medical facility right here in our community that we really don't get a chance to invest in. So, and with that, I think Councillor Freeman just wanted to add.
I just want to thank staff. I wanted to thank you for really wrapping your heads around this and looking at all the different ways that we could be a partner in this project. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote then. All of those in favor? Carried unanimously.
Thank you.
That's excellent. I think that's going to be a fantastic addition for the community. So we've moved from those closer to the end of life to the next item up. We have Brad making a presentation on City Waterloo Council endorsement of the joint region-wide Smart Cities Challenge Phase 1 application. So going from folks at the end of the life to folks at the beginning. Brad?
So good afternoon, Council, senior staff, members of the public, which I think the ones that were here are leaving. It is my pleasure to be here this afternoon to provide a brief overview of CAO 2018-009, the City of Waterloo Council endorsement of the joint Regional of Waterloo Smart Cities Challenge Phase 1 application. The Smart Cities Challenge is a Canadian-wide competition open to all municipalities, regional governments, Indigenous communities of all sizes. Minister of Infrastructure and Communities, Minister Sohi, announced this program in late 2017. The process was to be resident-led, with local residents identifying challenges in our community for which smart city technology could be leveraged to make an improvement. With the Phase 1 application being due on February 24th, we had a very tight timeline to pull all of this together. Fortunately for Waterloo Region, extensive community consultation regarding the challenges our area is facing had already been undertaken by the Wellbeing Waterloo Region initiative. This initiative identified 3 priority areas, which are identified on the screen: healthy children and youth, social inclusion, and affordable housing. Our Smart City Advisory Committee, comprised of representatives from industry, education, health, and the not-for-profit sector, recommended focusing in on these 3 priority areas for a public consultation. So based on this strategic direction, Public and stakeholder engagement took place throughout the month of February. 4 public information centers were held, with 1 taking place at Waterloo Memorial Recreation Complex. 2 strategic stakeholder roundtable sessions were held. In addition, an online survey through the shared regional platform, Engage. So the online survey was available from February 12th to March 9th. In addition to having the survey, background information was provided on the Smart Cities Challenge, as well as some information on the ongoing Wellbeing Waterloo Region initiative. In total, 435 responses were received. Overall, there was general support of all 3 of the areas from the community. However, due to the requirements of the Smart Cities Challenge, our challenge statement will need to be targeted and measurable, resulting in the need to choose one area of focus. As mentioned, 2 stakeholder roundtable sessions were held in Kitchener and designed by Overlap. Approximately 150 participants worked through interactive activities that focused on envisioning a future smart-enabled Waterloo region and which challenge areas could benefit the most from a smart technology solution. Healthy children and youth was the top priority resulting from the stakeholder sessions. However, similar to the Engage survey and the Wellbeing Waterloo Region initiative, it's clear that all 3 are priorities of the community. However, as mentioned, we do need to select one, and based on all the findings, it's being recommended by the Smart Cities Challenge Steering Committee, comprised of the local CAOs, that our challenge area focuses on healthy children and youth. This recommendation was also supported by the Advisory Committee. Healthy children and youth is thought to best align with the Smart Cities Challenge and also aligns with a number of federal government priorities, including diverse and inclusive Canada, healthy Canadians, and jobs and innovation. So the City of Waterloo is currently offering numerous programs and services supporting healthy children and youth. Some of these were outlined in the council report, such as the annual Council for a Day contest, which we just seen on Wednesday at the State of the City, various camp programs, CAN bike clinics, and outdoor community rinks. So in order to submit the Phase 1 application by April 24th, council endorsement from each local municipality is required. Similar reports have been or are being presented this week to regional council and also the local city and township councils. If Waterloo Region is selected as one of the 5 finalists under the large category, notification is expected this summer. And then a more detailed Phase 2 application would be required by the winter of 2018-2019. In order to assist with the more detailed application, $250,000 would be provided by the federal government to assist with this application. So the report recommendations that are before you today are shown on screen, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that council may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brad. Questions from council? Seeing none, I'll look for a mover and seconder for this item. Moved by Councillor Veith, seconded by Mayor Jaworski. Any comments, either of you? I'll simply add, thank you, Brad, to you and the broader team across the region for the coordination and work, regardless of the outcome of this application and the process. The process of identifying a community challenge, of talking to all of our partners and wrapping this all together is a positive outcome for the community. As you in the report have indicated, the City of Waterloo, like many participants in the region, have programs to support children and youth, but we don't have an integrated, coordinated plan. And I think the ability for us to connect very well and better together, regardless of the outcome of this, can only be of benefit for the children and youth of Waterloo and Waterloo region. So thank you for your leadership on these items. Councillor Whaley?
Which raises the point, Brad. So we've invested this time to drill down to a region-wide concern, and it's healthy children and youth. We've invested the time to understand that this is a problem that we want to address. Now, really, the potential for us actually winning this thing with a competition that's nationwide, I'm sure there's 1,000 applications, maybe even more, from towns and cities across this nation. So the likelihood of us actually being the one is pretty remote. Given that, though, we have identified a problem. It is something that we can work on together. Is there any thought or thinking within the group that this might be something that we want to take on and carry out as a mission, regardless of the outcome of the winter?
So through Chair Henry to Councillor Whaley's question, very good question. So you're right, there is one winner in the large category for $50 million. So we're competing with some of the largest cities in Canada. We're aware that some of them are putting forward applications, so it will be a very competitive competition. The 3 areas identified through the Wellbeing Waterloo Region Initiative are proceeding, and they're looking at actions that can be undertaken. That's with or without the successful grant. The grant would go a long way in terms of providing funding to kind of make things happen. We have a very impressive list of community partners who are already committed to working with us. So Communitech, ODX, Google, Desire to Learn, just to name a few. So there's a real appetite in the community to continue on this work. But like I said, the grant will go a long way in terms of providing some funding, but I think it's proceeding with or without the grant funding.
Thank you. Good to hear. Okay, seeing no further comments or questions, it's on the floor. All those in favor? Again, carried unanimously. Thank you very much, Brad. Next, we have a couple of items, and they are separate and sequenced and in order. First up is the Asset Management Plan, Long-Term Financial Plan Public Engagement Update. Cassandra is available to answer any questions from Council on that particular exercise and update before we move into the full report. Councillor Freeman?
Through you, Chair Henry, I don't know whether it's really a question at this time for Cassandra. It's kind of, my comments on the next report kind of blend into the communications. So is it okay, can I just do it at that time, or would you rather have them separate? Is that okay?
Yeah, we can hold those. I thought if there's anything specific on the report.
I can tell you that it's related specifically to some of the questions. So the way that some of the questions were asked, it kind of leads one to believe that if you were to throw more money at it, so somehow or another fund it differently, that it would change the outcome of the answer. And in particular, one of the questions that I think is problematic is the question that asks people whether or not they're satisfied with the timeliness of road construction projects. Because it suggests that if you spent more money to fix the road, or you fixed it more quickly, or you fixed it in a different way, that you would inherently change that outcome. But I don't agree with that. I don't think that's true. I think that's a problem with some of the tools that we have, that we still have to include in the next report. So I just want, that's kind of where I'm headed with it.
I wouldn't disagree with you on the timeliness of repairs, right? Whether you do more work or less work, that is not inherently affecting how long it takes to do work. Exactly. But yeah, it also doesn't surprise me to see the difference in those two answers between, you know, how satisfied are you with the condition, and how satisfied are you with the fact that when you tear up a road, it takes some time, because we all get those emails.
Well, in all fairness, the timing of this questionnaire associated with some projects that, from a scheduling perspective, have gone dramatically over schedule and that were not city projects, are inherently drove that answer. And we could have had an extraordinary infrastructure levy in place and not been able to change that answer. And that's what I'm really trying to get at.
Yeah, there's always challenges of timing and things that are going off a little bit. So if I'm not seeing any questions on the public engagement report, since I haven't, I'm happy to roll right through to the next item, but I will need to move receiving it as information because we're receiving lots of information today. Councillor Freeman, seconded by Mayor Jaworski. Okay, any other comments on that? I think the only note I have, I think I gleaned in the report or somewhere else that part of the next steps of public engagement in these activities is that it become ongoing and connected with other open houses and public consultation centers we do on individual projects. I couldn't find that again when I looked this morning, but I could have sworn I read that somewhere in a draft. Cass?
Through you, Chair Henry, that is correct. Public engagement on asset management and long-term financial planning is a difficult topic to do on its own. So in the future, we're looking to ask 1 or 2 questions at regular open houses on topics that people are specifically interested in and are coming to.
I think that's certainly, helpful. I think we all see this in other lines of city work. You want to do a broad consultation on an official plan, that's challenging. Somebody comes in with an application and needs a variance or a zone change, that's a different kettle of fish for getting people engaged. So I think that's a good plan of action to make sure this continues to come up in front of people's minds. Okay, so with that, I'll take the vote on receiving the information of the public engagement report. All those in favor? That's carried. And we'll move into the meat and potatoes of this item, long-term financial plan staff scenario. We've got a team of, Cassandra, Julie, and Philippa to walk us through.
Well, thank you, Council and senior staff, for having us present the staff long-term financial plan for your consideration today. Myself, Cassandra, and Julie will be presenting to you. We'll be starting off by talking about what Council is being asked to approve today. Then we will remind you of the journey of where we came from, the long-term financial plan model and assumptions, review some of our policy changes and funding opportunities, summarize our presentation and what's before you, and then also talk about the journey forward. So the path towards long-term sustainability has several steps. And the first step was taken, the animation is not working. The first step was taken back in 2016 when Council approved the award-winning asset management plan. The second step was when Council actually approved the reserve consolidation earlier this year, and that was really the first step that we took to link the asset management plan with more of the financial tools. The third step, which is what is before you today, is limited but strategic funding for some reserves and winter control operating budget, policy updates in terms of our reserve policies and financial policies, and then providing direction to staff to refer the long-term financial plan funding requirements, including the consideration of the funding opportunities, grants, and efficiencies, to the next budget process in 2020, the 2020 to 22 budget process. And finally, the last step is for future Council considerations, and that is that the long-term financial plan be part of future budget processes, and this will span many, many years and many, many councils. So now I'll pass it over to Cassandra for the next part of our presentation.
Thanks, Philippa, Chair Henry, Mayor, members of Council. As Philippa mentioned, there are some funding opportunities identified in the report Corp 2018-11, such as the general tax levy increases, debt, Rim Park debt charges, infrastructure levy. These are 4 key areas within the long-term financial plan. However, a decision to implement them, as Philippa noted, is pending a future Council's approval. For example, the use of the Rim Park debt charges is included. However, the ultimate decision will be made by a councillor in the 2031 to 2034 term. Over the next few slides, I'm going to provide an overview of the steps taken to date. There are a few key items to note, such as Council has undertaken and approved numerous actions over the last few years to achieve and advance the city's sustainability. Some examples include the establishment of the Capital Infrastructure Reinvestment Reserve Fund, or CURF, and the development and approval of the city's first asset management plan. We've already met a number of the requirements under the new asset management legislation enacted by the province. In addition to approving sustainability actions, Council has also approved various efficiencies. Some examples include the LED street lighting savings were incorporated into the 2018 budget, and staff are investigating the possibilities of incorporating more into the 2019 budget. We also have joint services. The city works with all regional municipal partners, as Brad did recently, and have implemented such things as the Regional Road Maintenance Agreement, After-Hours Dispatch, and the Waterloo Regional Economic Development Corporation. Other examples of both sustainability and efficiencies are included in the report that can be found in section 1.2. On March 19th, Council approved a report that outlined the consultant's scenario for the long-term financial plan and provided some feedback to staff. While more information is included in Appendix E, a few highlights are the impact of increasing capital expenditures. The staff scenario recognizes that it's taken a long time for our asset performance to reach its current conditions, and it will take a long time to improve it. As a result, rehabilitation activities are being phased in over a longer period of time than proposed by the consultant. In regards to capital project deferral, decisions to defer capital projects will take place through other processes such as the budget or the DC bylaw update, as the long-term financial plan is based on the principle of building on existing processes and approved documents. Council also identified several areas to investigate, such as grants for funding, Rim Park debt charges, and debt. More information on these items is included in section 2.4. To include a brief cap on the key points of the actual long-term financial plan model. This model is similar to the asset management plan and analytical system, in that it is a made-in-Waterloo system to support other processes such as budget, DC bylaw, and the asset management system. The model is a living document that includes the ability for council and for staff to modify levers such as inflation rates and the inclusion of the estimated operating budget impacts of capital. One of the first steps that we undertook was to develop some assumptions, and some of them include that the City of Waterloo is not alone in having an infrastructure funding gap, as municipalities in Ontario and across the world are having similar concerns. In Ontario, AMO has identified a $6 billion annual funding gap over the next 10 years and is outlined further in Appendix D. Julie will talk about the financial control and reserve policies in a moment. But one of the other areas is the operating budget and revenue expenditures. Applying inflation increases to the operating budget for both revenue and expenditures will help maintain existing service levels. In regards to property taxes, they are the main revenue source for municipalities, and it will be necessary to consider increases in order to maintain those existing service levels. And similar to the capital budget, enterprise financial models are a key tool that drive the long-term financial plan.
In January, Council approved the consolidation of a number of reserves and reserve funds. This approval provided a basis on which staff could begin a forward-looking review of our reserve levels and contributions to address the city's needs over the next 25 years through the development of the long-term financial plan. A number of key concepts were considered during the analysis as it related to reserve levels. The need to address both funding for growth and funding for rehabilitation and to find an appropriate balance between them. The need to reconsider existing contribution levels and whether current allocations are appropriate for future needs. The need to ensure that sustainable funding exists for reserves so that the need to access contingency funding is reduced. And the need to minimize the pressure to the tax rate resulting from any contribution level changes. As a result of the review, staff are recommending that sustainable operating contributions be added to 4 reserve and reserve funds, as well as an increase to the winter control operating budget. It is recommended that this funding is provided through a reduction to the existing contribution to the capital reserve fund, and therefore would have no impact to the tax rate. Staff are also recommending a number of changes to the minimum target and maximum levels for some key reserve and reserve funds. The changes are looking ahead to how best to manage needs over the next 25 years, and it's not the intention that the target or max levels will be reached within the immediate future. Rather, it's more of a long-term approach. The details of the recommended levels for each are in section 4 of the report that's before you today. Please note that the estimated timing to reach these levels is dependent upon future budget processes. The asset management plan has helped the city to quantify our rehabilitation needs, and the development charges background study completed in 2017 has helped us to quantify our projected growth and the need for new assets. Through the development of the long-term financial plan and the recommendations before you today for consideration, staff have considered the funding requirements for both growth and rehabilitation needs and sought to find an appropriate balance between the two, a complex issue. As a result, staff are recommending an update to 3 policies to better align reserve contributions with identified needs and to update policies for changes previously approved by Council. Staff is recommending that in order to continue to work towards addressing the rehabilitation needs, the use of budgeted assessment growth policy be updated to redirect 10% of assessment growth currently going to the Capital Reserve Fund to the Capital Infrastructure Reinvestment Reserve Fund. Under the current allocation of surplus policy, Economic Development Reserve receives a 25% portion of year-end surplus, if any is generated. As mentioned a few slides ago, staff is recommending that instead the Economic Development Reserve receive an ongoing contribution each year, and therefore that this policy be updated to redirect the 25% to the Capital Infrastructure Reinvestment Reserve Fund. The third recommended policy change is a housekeeping item to update the capital budget policy to align with decisions Council has made since the start of the last budget process, such as the routine and non-routine project reporting criteria, and most recently the reserve consolidations.
When developing a long-term financial plan, staff considered many things. And one of the primary focuses was that the long-term financial plan was maintaining existing levels of service and utilizing documentation such as the 2019 to 2026 capital forecast approved by Council. New services or increased levels of services will need to be considered through the budget process, and that the long-term financial plan can help identify the immediate and long-term impact. Staff also analyzed the 2019 to 2026 capital forecast to estimate the operating impact of capital and related timing. Operating impacts of capital can significantly impact the operating budget, and if a project is advanced or deferred, the timing of that impact also changes. It is anticipated that additional staff resources will be required as capital reinvestment increases. As the city grows the capital reinvestment, the workload of all staff will need to be considered and be tabled before each council for approval. It's important to note that the report before council today is not requesting approval for any increases to staff resources. The long-term financial plan also includes a rebalancing of capital reserve fund dollars to the operating budget beginning in 2020. Rebalancing of existing funding will assist in addressing preventative maintenance, further position the city to satisfy the province's asset management regulation, and reduce the city's risk and liability associated with assets. In addition, Council's reserve consolidation approval in January has reorganized existing funding, which is providing increased funding flexibility and transparency. This approach will allow for additional capital rehabilitation expenditures through existing funding. The long-term financial plan also included the investigation into several funding opportunities. And the highlights are that the long-term financial plan was developed to utilize general tax levy increases to fund operational activities, as an infrastructure levy is believed to be more transparent to report on the positive actions undertaken by Council. While staff investigated the Waterloo North Hydro investment income surplus as a funding opportunity, the recommendation is to remain conservative by maintaining the existing $1.7 million budget. The City of Waterloo has benefited greatly by approximately $9 million in grant funding over the 2012 to 2017 timeframe. A great example is a benefit of grants on the City of Waterloo's infrastructure is the Clean Water Wastewater Fund, or CWWF. The City of Waterloo was awarded $3.9 million, and together with $1.3 million of city funding, will improve the performance of 9 stormwater management ponds. The graph on the screen before you is a 10-year snapshot of the stormwater management assets based on the information in the 2016 Asset Management Plan. In 2017 and 2018, the asset performance was projected to be between 80 to 90% in poor or very poor condition. This new graph is another 10-year snapshot of the stormwater management assets, however includes the anticipated benefit of improving the performance of the 9 stormwater management ponds funded through the CWWF and city funding. Due to this funding, there is an anticipated 30% improvement of stormwater management assets from 2017 to 2018. At this time, staff believe it is more cost-effective to incorporate debt for the construction of new assets and to maintain the pay-as-you-go approach for rehabilitation projects, as the cost of debt is currently higher than the interest earned on our investments. As you've heard before earlier today in other reports, the final payment for Rim Park debt is in 2031, and this will allow for $3.6 million of operating budget funding to be redirected in 2032. The long-term financial plan currently redirects $1.8 million to CURF to assist with the infrastructure funding gap and the balance for council to consider new or increased levels of service. Analysis performed through the long-term financial plan modeling process suggests that an infrastructure levy in the range of 1.5% for 11 years is optimal for the City of Waterloo. This represents an estimated annual household impact of $20 to $23. If implemented, the levy will provide annual tax-based funding of approximately $15 million by the 11th year, which will help close the annual infrastructure gap of $14 to $17 million as identified in the 2016 Asset Management Plan. This funding will allow the city to work towards meeting established levels of service. The graph on your screen before you shows you the budgeted asset performance from the 2016 Asset Management Plan for all of our assets and identifies that the city will have almost 60% of assets in poor or very poor condition by 2042 based on existing funding levels. And an infrastructure levy of 1.5% is anticipated to improve the performance of the city's assets by approximately 20% by 2042, as noted by that last bracket. There were 2 other alternatives considered, and they can be found in Appendix F. Infrastructure levies are a tool that municipalities throughout Ontario are using. While a comprehensive listing of municipalities with infrastructure levies has not been created, staff researched a few municipalities to see what they're doing. In addition, we reached out to these municipalities to gain a better understanding of when their levy started, their infrastructure gap when their levy started, and where the gap is today. As of today, we have received limited responses. In summary, as Philippa noted earlier, the report before Council today has 2 approval components. The first is what is being requested of Council today, the approval of sustainable reserve funding, policy updates, and the direction to refer the long-term financial plan funding requirements to the 2020 to 2022 budget process. The second component is for future councils, and that is the strategic implementation of funding opportunities. Due to our living tool, the long-term financial plan will continue to be updated and refined over time. A few items that staff will be investigating are additional funding tools include capital overhead or having water services contribute towards road reconstructions. In addition to funding tools, there are internal process improvements that we can be making, such as preventative maintenance plans, improvements to the capital project sheets, having a tool to project assessment growth, and aligning the DC bylaw with a 3-year budget process. More information on these items, as well as a few others, are included in Section 6 of the report. Thank you for your time today, and we are happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Cassandra, Julie, and Philippa. Looking to Council for questions. I'm sure we have a few, though I've seen no hands. Somebody will need to identify that they wish to ask a question, or we won't get out of here. Councillor Maven?
Yes, I have some questions. Cass, can we go to slide 14, please? Okay. The funding opportunities, and I appreciate you putting in the Waterloo North Hydro funding opportunity. It's the income, it's only talking about the isolated part. You took the 1.7 million that currently exists as your baseline, and you said that's off the table. not sure that's keeping all the options open.
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Maven. There's currently also $900,000 built into the capital budget as surplus. So while we have $1.7 million built into the operating budget, we've also targeted $900,000 in the capital budget. Based on information that we've received on the surplus that is projected going forward, the surplus will be in around what we're currently experiencing, potentially a little lower, potentially a little higher. That's why we're recommending that at this time we remain conservative and keep the budget as is.
Okay, just right now, if we take the $1.7 million out of the operating budget, let's just deal with the operating budget by itself for simplicity's sake, and move it into CURF as a contribution to CURF every year, that almost doubles the contribution we currently have, for starters.
Through you, Chair Henry, Councillor Maven, you're correct, that would move, but then we would have a $1.7 million funding gap in the operating budget.
You'd have a one-time amount to cover, which you could do with a 1% increase over 3 years. Is that not reasonable?
Through you, Chair Henry, you could, except that you'd have to draw from tax rate stabilization to fund the 2/3 in the first year. You'd have to fund it over time.
There's phase-in
options,
yeah.
yes.
Okay, let's look at the other end then, because we can deal with the hole it might create in the operating budget. Now, if we look at the other end, and that is where the 1.7 comes from, is the 50-50 policy still in existence at Hydro for dividends?
I have to defer that to Keshwar, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it is. I knew the answer, sorry.
Okay.
So the 50% policy is still existing. That policy came in at a time when Hydro basically came in just about 2005, 2006. Hydro just reorganized in 2001. They were in a cash shortage. They had some problems. And if you do a survey of Hydros across Ontario, you'll find the 50% dividend policy is pretty low compared to most other jurisdictions. So if we went and increased, or if Hydro did, went and increased our share of the dividends, all of a sudden that 1.7 is going to be higher than what we currently get. So we go back to the source and say, look, and based on comments casually spoken about on the appointees report, and this is not a gotcha, but there's things going on there that might produce even more revenues. So having this very old dividend policy, which I know it's been reviewed once, but maybe it needs to be reviewed with a little bit of a different slant to it. Like how can we maximize our revenues out of Hydro rather than how can we share them with Hydro? So if we get $6 million a year, say, in profits from Hydro, that's Hydro's profits. Maybe it's 5.5, maybe it's 6, I don't know, maybe it's 5. Whatever it is, if we all of a sudden take 70% of that out, or 75%, which is probably closer to the norm across Ontario. I'm speculating there, but I'm assuming it still is. Then that obviously will increase the amount of money we get from Hydro to start off with. So we've got various means of increasing revenues rather than going to the general property tax levy or even the infrastructure levy in the long term. So that's when I was talking about the Waterloo North investment income. I wanted to look more than just the surplus, more than just the current contribution we receive into how can we even make that grow. And if there are revenue opportunities that may materialize through Hydro or Holco, then hopefully that will add to the CURF contribution as well. So you look like, excuse me for stuttering, but if you look at it from the point of view, okay, how can we maximize revenues without automatically going to the property tax? My furnace goes, I can't say, okay, I'm going to go and say, Omers, I want more money. And I can't go to CPP and say, CPP, I want more money. And yet, what we're doing is the first thing we're looking at is the property taxes, the source, or the infrastructure levy is the source, is a permanent source. And that's all I'm trying to get away from, changing that thought process a little bit.
So through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Maven, Because the long-term financial plan is an iterative plan and we have a tool, it's not a stagnant document, this is definitely something that staff can take away in advance of the 2020 to 2022 iteration for council.
Well, this can't happen overnight. Obviously, it has to go through hydro and so on.
Because I have further response from Ms. Patel to your question, Councillor Maven, before you move on to your next.
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Maven. Thank you very much for the suggestion in terms of other options with respect to the Waterloo North Hydro dividend. And in the last few months, when we had looked at other hydro companies, we did find that one of our neighbouring hydros, their dividend distribution was 40%. So it does vary among different municipalities, and certainly we can take it back in our conversations with Waterloo North Hydro if there's room to expand it to 60 or a higher percentage in that. But I'm also wary of the fact that some are at a 40%. Given that, the model that we've done is a snapshot at a point in time. So based on the information that we have as at this point in time, this is what the scenario looks like. And you're absolutely right. If we were to get additional grants, if, as Amo has suggested, the 1% local share, if that were to come through as sales tax, if we had additional hydro dividend, this model is an interactive model that we will absolutely revise. The focus is not always to go straight to the taxpayer as an infrastructure levy. We would absolutely look at all those other levers that are in place, but we would be doing that more so in the budget process when all the other factors come into play. That is when, as a city, we bring together all our efficiencies, all the information that we have, put it before council to look at reprioritization. One of the other levers that we can certainly look at is spreading out the capital program. The moment we have a capital program in a particular year, the operating impact follows 2 years later. If we were to defer that capital program, the operating impact could be deferred, which would result in lower taxes. So there's so many different levers that can be pulled. So what we're trying to do today is to demonstrate that we have this model, this is what it looks like based on the information now. It will be helpful in future budget processes as well as any other future capital opportunities that come for council to keep this model in mind. So if council wanted to invest $10 million in project A, B, or C, it would be helpful to keep this model in mind and understand we've got this other pressure sitting out there. So that's why it's a snapshot in time, but we absolutely appreciate all the other suggestions that you have that we will bring forward in a budget process, in various budget processes over the next decade, 2 decades.
Great. Thank you very much. And what I'm seeing, though, is a self-fulfilling prophecy here, where if we don't go looking for other options, if you don't search for something, you're not going to find it. That's a very simple axiom. And so if we predetermine that these are the areas we're going to look at without maybe taking a little different angle at them, we'll end up with a result that we're somewhat self-fulfilling thinking it's going to be. I acknowledge, by the way, that there are some municipalities or hydros who pay less than we do, but the 50% is on the low end. And that's something that can be examined, it can be changed, because we have the most votes on hydro still, sort of. Okay, that's the one thing I wanted to talk about. And you agree that we could fill the gap in the hydro with an interim levy rather than a permanent levy. Can I just get you to explain the levy assumption? Because in the report it says the average annual impact is $20 a household. But that's $20 the first year, $40 the second year, $60 the third year, and so on and so on and so on. Is that how it works?
Through you, Chair Henry, that's correct. By the end of the 11 years, it'd be approximately $500 per household.
Right. And that's pretty significant. Then all I'm trying to do is say, let's make it a little more manageable by being a little more creative. On page 8 of the report, page 204 of the agenda, and this is positive news, I like it, and I'm glad to see it here. It's a small comment about efficiencies and how by changing LED lights, we've saved $210,000 annually. Now, I still in the back of my mind, Cass, have this massive electrical retrofit project that was going to save the city somewhere between $2 and $4 million a year. Is that been built in already, or is that still coming?
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Maven. The project that you're talking about was initiated, I think, in 2010 to 2011, and some of the funding would have already been built into the budget, such as when we did the 2015 budget catch-ups, or true-ups as we called them at the time. We wouldn't have needed as much as we would have had we not done that project. I don't know the value of the actual savings, though. I'd have to refer that to Sunda.
What it really means is, and we're okay, we can carry on with the conversation we're having. What it means is, if we look at things a little differently and efficiencies come into play, and we make investment in assets, that those investments can create a return. They can reduce maintenance, they can increase savings. Technology can do all kinds of things. So those opportunities exist too if we look for them, if we build them in, if we make them happen.
Through you, Chair Henry, that's correct. And that's one of the reasons why, in one of the assumptions, we put in some preventative maintenance dollars so that we can preventatively maintain our assets so that it will take longer before we actually have to rehabilitate them or replace them.
Right. Okay.
Councilor Maven, I just noticed on the side, I have a notice of motion coming next week to speak to some element of that.
Okay, good. Good timing. Let's see.
Sorry, I'm seeing Ms. Patel. I'm not keeping my gaze where it needs to be. Who has further on your last point before you get to your next one?
Okay, fine.
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Maven. Off the top of my head, I think we had a capital project was roughly about $3.9 to $3.5 million for energy efficiency, and we have a memo that's coming to CMT next week or two, and the savings that we have roughly are close to $500,000, but it's been built in partially over the years. So yes, we have got the payback. I think the payback is roughly 8 years. So we have those kind of savings. Most of it has already been incorporated into the budget.
Right, and I guess that reinforces the fact, instead of going to CURF, it goes to the budget. And I'm simply saying, again, you look at options, you can do it. The other thing is the transfer from the CRF to CURF. That's a little bit of a shell game. We're moving money from one capital to, first of all, we're reducing the contribution to capital overall, moving it to operating. And we're not moving it all to CURF, we're moving part of it. So we're putting what we currently spend on capital, which we're saying we're not spending enough on capital, and we're taking that capital and we're moving it into operating. I have a little trouble, it seems like a little bit of a dichotomy there.
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Maven. If you'll notice that the redirection is from the Capital Reserve Fund, and when we tabled the Reserve Consolidation Report in January, the purpose of the Capital Reserve Fund was changed. So that particular reserve is now focused on new assets or studies, whereas the CURF is for the rehabilitation. So essentially what we're doing is we are refocusing the budget towards rehabilitation and less on the new.
But we're reducing the amount we're going to spend on capital and CRF.
Correct. We're reducing how much we would spend on new assets.
Significantly.
Correct.
Yes. Even though some of those new assets, one of the problems with new assets is they can be the ones that have the largest savings overall. And using hydro as or electricity savings is the best example. Okay. Yeah. Bear with me, Cass. Page 208 of the agenda, page 12 of the report. This is under property tax levy changes, and this is an argument I've had with a number of different people, including the mayor. And not even this mayor, some other mayors. But it's the closing line is it would be necessary to consider. When you use the word necessary and consider they're together, consider doesn't mean anything. Increases to the property tax base in order to maintain existing service levels. So setting aside all the assets, questions and everything else, you're saying just with the service levels the way it is, property tax increases are going to be higher than what, is this a warning or what is that?
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Maven. No, it's a statement to say that the staff will look at whether or not it's necessary to increase taxes. It's not saying it's predetermined. It's not saying it would happen. It's necessary to look at it so that we can make the recommendations to council for their ultimate decision.
Okay. Two things. page 211, and please bear with me, council, I got a couple of questions here. Page 211 of the agenda, page 15 of the report. In the fire station in 2025, have we seen the study yet for the fire station 5?
Through you, Councillor Henry, to Chair Maven, no, the study has not come through. I believe Mark Dykstra can provide some more information on the timing of that particular study.
Okay,
So I think that's helpful. That was on my list too.
Through Chair to Councillor Maven, details have not been presented to Council yet. Still on the work plan for fire services to review in the next quarter, in terms of reference, with more detail coming in early part of 2019.
So on this table, there's some items that perhaps haven't been approved by Council yet?
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Maven, the table 2 that you're looking for is based on the 2019 to 2026 approved capital forecast. Through the 2019 and 2020 budget processes, there's definitely opportunity that these items will change depending on what staff bring forward as a result of reports. But based on the approved capital forecast, this is trying to give Council a sense of what the operating impacts of those capital projects could be in the future.
And this doesn't even count the operating, this is just the capital side, right? Because the operating is going to be... That's the operating?
That is the operating.
Oh, thank you very much. Appreciate that. So that's why the 4% increase in 2024 in taxes. Okay. I think that that'll be it for my questions. What I see this report as being is, and if council wants to approve any part of this report, what they're really doing is this report is setting the stage for certain actions to happen in the next term, in the next council. And I think that there are things that can be looked at still that don't necessarily drive property tax increases, but where it's really going to fall is going to be in the next council, and I think this report should be deferred and referred to that council and not dealt with by this one, because even setting some of the stages here relative to the reserve funds, relative to the use of CURF, relative to the use of CRF, excuse me again, gets my breath here. But any which way, there's nothing here that should be, if you really do part of the job in the next term council, should have all of it. We shouldn't be setting policies that tie the hands perhaps, or steer the direction of councils in the next term. It shouldn't happen. So I'd like to move that this report refer to next council, and I don't know how we can do that.
I was in questions at this stage, Councillor Maven. No other member of council has asked any questions of this report, so I indulged. So I'm inclined to go through and see who else has questions before I entertaining a motion of deferral or referral so that people can get this on the list. I see Councillor Freeman and Councillor Whaley.
Through you, Chair Henry. So with regard to this slide, I think that one of the things inherently I'm struggling with more broadly on this report is just that whole notion that the opportunities that exist relate entirely to finding more money or funding it differently. And I think that what I think people are asking us to do is to think differently. And if I look at where we spend a tremendous amount of our resources, it's in procurement. And I'm not really sure that we've sat down and said, is our procurement right? And that speaks to the question that I feel people answered about road construction and how long it takes to fix. Because when you consistently go with the lowest bidder, and they find out how much money they left on the table in procurement, they aren't all that motivated to get the work done very quickly. And then when we go in and we try to put in penalties for not getting the work done, I get told, well, if we do that in procurement, in all likelihood, we won't get enough people bidding on the work because it's too high of a risk. So we got to think differently. And if the public procurement system, as we're forced to use by the province, isn't working, then we need to think about that. We've got a made in Waterloo solution for this piece. Maybe we need a made in Waterloo solution for our procurement. And when people ask me, why can't you save money? I routinely respond by saying private business owners can enter into long-term working relationships with suppliers that help them to reduce pricing, and municipalities can't. And one of the big barriers to that is our public procurement system. And so, you know, in my mind's eye, is a huge piece associated with infrastructure and how much it really costs us to undertake these projects. And to my way of thinking, that's a huge tool that we should be looking at very meaningfully as we think about this program. And it needs to be thought at on an equal basis with these other things like user fees and going after grants. And I really believe that people want us to start thinking differently. Are we thinking differently, for example, on the way in which we're approaching our capital management? For example, are we considering that we want to prioritize all of our expenditure on our infrastructure that's good to fair, so we keep it good to fair, and then every year chip away at the stuff that's essentially on fire, right? So we know that we have roads that are past their lifespan. They're gone. Like they are totally in poor condition. They're gone. We can't get them back. So do we need to do 10 of those roads in a year? Or do we do one of those roads in a year and focus our attention on fair and good so that we keep it in that category? And that reduces our long-term impact from a life cycle perspective in terms of this model. And so those are all the pieces that I think should be a part of this toolkit and that aren't. And so for me, I would like to see this deferred for a number of reasons. One is that I don't want to be making decisions for the next council, and I think this is a very big piece. I think it's a very important piece, and that the next council should have the same amount of time spent trying to ferret through this. I actually don't feel as though I have everything in my mind's eye to be able to approve all of this today. And I read the 240-page packet, and I still feel like there's more I want to know about this. And I don't even think I have all the questions in my mind's eye today to ask them, in all fairness. Because I think this is a really important piece. And I think we're sending the wrong message to the broader community when the only tool that we talk about is increasing fees, increasing taxes, and bringing in a levy. Because when I read this report, it doesn't help me as someone who's a member of the broader community to understand all the other stuff that we're doing as a community. And one of the questions that I really wanted answered in this report from when it was brought to us before was actually where we stand with regard to other municipalities, not just a broad statement that says everybody's in Dodge with regard to their outstanding infrastructure. I literally wanted to know, normalize something. I don't care what you want to use, whether you want to use population or whether you want to use households or whatever, but I wanted to see some normalized data that basically said, you told me, I think, $37,000 per household or something is how much of the infrastructure that people own. But I want to know what that number is in Kingston. But I want to know what they owe on it. Not what they own of it, I want to know what they owe on it. And because I actually think that we're a long ways ahead of some of our comparative municipalities on this piece. And but I don't have that to be able to point to or to touch on that. And so there's a lot of moving pieces on this for me, and I'm not saying that I'm going to get all the answers, and I'm not saying that you did a bad job, because I realize it's a huge, complex issue, and so I hope that you don't take my comments that way. That's not what I mean. But I just feel there's an awful lot more tools than just these four.
see if there is certainly the comparator aspect. The AMO data, I know we did take a look at where we were in terms of a gap and what the average gap was if you pull out from the AMO side. Maybe you want to respond to that, and then I'll have some procedural things to deal with. Ms. Patel?
Through you, Councillor Henry, to Councillor Freeman. Those are some very valid questions and concerns, Councillor Freeman, and I will attempt to address some of them. The very fact that you mentioned about prioritizing some of the roads projects as an example and good to fair and incorporating them as a high priority and having some policies around it. Now that we have the asset management plan completed, that is exactly what will be happening in future budget processes. That is exactly, we're going to use the asset management plan to decide what gets funded and what is deferred and what is put to a later date. This is where it will be in the budget process. So that's where we're also trying to figure out as to how to put a model forward that says conceptually, this is where we're headed. But the actual details will happen when we do the budget, because that's when we will know exactly what the priorities are that we need to focus on for the next 2 years, the 3 years or 4 years of the council term or the longer term of the capital budget. So we will certainly be incorporating that, but at this point to put it in a model would be hard for us to anticipate how to incorporate all of that in the model. This is at a high level picture. So I don't disagree with your points, it's just that it will be coming in the budget process. With respect to procurement, we have looked at the quality-based selection. As you might know, we've had a forum on that, so we are initiating projects on it. The asset management plan had indicated that the annual shortfall that we have is roughly 17 to 20 million on the tax-based side. So I think when I look at it from my own years of experience in the municipal sector, our user fees and our rates have never incorporated the full cost of providing service. Municipal finance has never taken into account capital consumption or depreciation, as we call it. We have always looked at our budgets on a cash flow basis and tried to recover what we needed from a budget perspective. Things have changed in the last 5 to 7 years, where the province has mandated the asset management plan. They have mandated that we come up with a sustainable basis of funding our assets. Our DC studies have to now be linked to the asset management plan. So now I think the chickens are coming to roost in that we have to start looking at how do we close the gap of previous years where we never recovered the cost of the capital assets that we had. And so that is why, that's the fundamental reason why we're seeing the infrastructure deficit and shortfall across the city. In terms of assuming that it's going on the tax base, I wouldn't say that's the sole assumption. We would absolutely be looking at other opportunities, whether we look at user fees. We try to balance that out in the budget process with what are the competitive rates in the private sector with the other cities. So there's a lot of interactive, iterative decisions that are made at the staff level in the budget process, which is when we would want to actually implement whatever funding strategy we come up. But at this stage, we're looking at it more from a concept point and saying we've looked at all the variables that we know now. This is what the scene looks like. It will absolutely get tweaked in the budget process as more firm items are on the table.
Sure, briefly, and then I want to check in.
And I hear what you're saying, and I do understand that. I just feel that today I'm being asked to make changes to how it is that we fund some of our reserve funds and how that goes. And it's linked inherently to some of the assumptions that you folks have made on the asset management plan. And as you said earlier, on that snapshot in time. And I'm not convinced that I agree with the snapshot in time. And so that's my piece. I think there's more to this than just what can get done today. And I, maybe you want to bring it back to me this same council year, and that's fine. I'll spend more time reading another 240 pages. But I just, there's more to this than just these 4 funding opportunities. I just believe that in my heart.
Okay, so the only other person I had on my question asking speakers list was Councillor Whaley. I wanted to check, Councillor Whaley, do you have questions for Cass about the report, or are you interested in participating in the debate I'm starting to see emerge at this stage? Okay, so we'll do that, and then I'll have to deal with procedural items for how we deal with motions people have attempted to raise, so I don't raise the ire of the clerk too far.
This is a complicated subject and a difficult read. and absorb most of our weekends, I'm certain. My question starts off with a little bit of a story, and that's the information I received from some constituents from time to time, and I'm sure you've all heard it, about getting on your bike on the Iron Horse Trail at Park Street and heading south. And you're on the Waterloo section of the trail, and it's pristine and beautiful, and as soon as you cross the city line, you hit a pothole. And people laugh about that, and they think, well, isn't that a reflection of the two communities in our own mind? And it's funny, but it's not really funny when you take a look at this, when you put it in the context of what we're talking about today. In that regard, I think our award-winning asset management plan has proven to be as much of a curse as it has a blessing, and that is because it puts us in a leadership role, even in Canada. Right across Canada, we're a leader in this asset management understanding, and I'm not certain that's really the place that we want to be, that far ahead. So down to my question, much of the public infrastructure in Waterloo is actually owned by the region of Waterloo, and I can think of the LRT, the facilities for the LRT, all the regional roads. They are on another asset management plan, another responsibility for another level of government. And is our asset management plan and all this long-term financial planning in sync with that? Because if it isn't, we're going to have a real difference in providing a level of service for the community, because it'll be on one road and people don't know it's a regional road, it'll be at one standard, and then in the Waterloo-owned regional roads, it'll be at another, and I worry about that. What about all the roads and the trails and the infrastructure that link up to our sister city to the south? It's contiguous service, that road, and all of a sudden we cross the line, and I gave the funny example of the Iron Horse Trail, but in fact, are we going to be in a situation where our sister city to the south has such a different level of infrastructure renewal plan that becomes as noticeable as the trail is today? That we have this, because we have this sophisticated asset management plan and this huge plan for this future, with the thought that we might have to pay for it with a levy, how are we going to be out of sync with our neighbor to the south? And I ask you that question sincerely because I don't have an answer for you. Are we, or do we need to have more dialogue and understanding about what the regional plan is and what the City of Kitchener plan is, so that we're not so far out front needlessly? And we don't have to be that far out front. That's the question. With respect to some of the stuff that Councillor Maven talks about and deferring this whole thing to the next council, I worry about tying the future council's hands by the decision we make today. Some of the stuff in here has long-term implications that might really be putting the future council on a course they don't want to be on. I'm not going to ask for a straw poll today because I already know the answer to this. If I had a straw poll today on do we want a infrastructure levy tomorrow here in the city of Waterloo, I know what the answer is because I've polled you all on this. And why should we be going down a road where the future council, based on our decision making today, would be forced into an answer there? And I don't know if that's the case. It's so complicated the report is so complex that might actually be the case, and I don't have an answer for all these things. I don't know what the regional plan is, I don't know what the city's kitchen's plan is, I don't know if there's synchronicity in those plans, and I don't know if the decisions I'm going to make today are going to tie the future council's hands and enforce an infrastructure levy on our citizens tomorrow when it's not in our intentions to do that today.
I don't remember the specific question that arose from there, and maybe staff did to respond to it.
Through you, Chair Henry, Councillor Whaley. So to answer what I believe was your first question is whether or not we're in sync with the region.
Yes.
And the City of Kitchener. I was going to answer it two-part. Do I know what their PQIs are for both of them and their connecting connections? No, sorry.
So you don't know that?
I can tell you anecdotally what Kitchener's is for their residential roads, and it's a PQI of 70. Our target is somewhere between 50 and 60. So we're already below, and that's our targeted levels of service. And the fact that we have approximately an $8 to $9 million funding gap on roads alone indicates that that PQI might have to come down. I don't know what the regional road is. Perhaps Cam does, but he does not. So you're right. There could be some PQI differences or levels of service difference between a regional road versus a residential road, but that's natural, and staff from the engineering perspective believe that's reasonable because you're going to maintain those heavily trafficked roads more frequently and maintain them a little bit better than you do on a residential road that maybe has 30 cars a day on it. So that's kind of natural that we would have that. And one of the things that we're looking at from an asset management perspective is whether or not we start to look at weighting our roads based on that, on some formula of that. So that's something we're looking into. But yes, we do know that the City of Kitchener has an average PQI that's a level of service that's higher than ours. They fund approximately $11 million a year on road reconstructions, where we fund probably about 4 to 5. They're twice as big. Yes, you're right. In regards to tying council's hands in the future, is not intended to tie council's hands. It's intended to refocus the spending patterns of the city to be on rehabilitation rather than on new assets. But it looks like Philippa might have some input.
Yes, just to add to that, and I think specifically, Councillor Whaley, I think you said tie council's hands to an infrastructure levy. And I think that's exactly what we're intending not to do. We are doing one of the steps, which is to really continue to align that first and second step with the asset management plan and look at some of the sustainability of our reserves. But it certainly would not result in a levy at this point, and we're not suggesting it in the next budget, which is the 2019 budget. We're looking at it for the 3-year. If a council at that time were interested in a levy, as an example, it would take many, many, many years to really start to see the impacts of that, because as Cassandra had said, it's taken a long time to get here. So if the solution keeps getting extended over the course of many years, it's going to take that much longer, because it will not be 1 or 2 years of a levy that will solve the issue. It will be many, many years of a solution, a financial solution, whatever that looks like, to start to bring in that gap. Whether it aligns perfectly with the region or Kitchener may or may not be the case, but in our own community and dealing with the issues we have here and looking for that longer term solution within our own control.
Through you, Chair Henry, if I may recap what Council is looking at before them today in terms of approval on page 36 of the report, we've explained what those recommendations are. So when we're looking at changing the use of the budgeted assessment growth, what it really is shifting our current contribution of 20% from Capital Reserve Fund and moving it more towards rehabilitation. So again, it's not tying Council's hand, but it's going to, as Councillor Freeman was suggesting, prioritizing on items relating to infrastructure. That is what the change in that policy would be. That is what Council would be approving. It is purely saying, how do we allocate the assessment growth? Looking at the next item with respect to the surplus, what we're essentially saying is that we would again like the surplus to go 200,000 to the Rim Park Investment Reserve, which is the same, 50% to the tax rate stave, and 50% to the Capital Infrastructure Reinvestment Reserve, which is again meant to deal with rehabilitation. So the steps that Council are approving today are essentially helping us focus towards rehabilitation. And as Philippa said, we are not recommending a levy. Council is not approving a levy at this point. It is simply allowing us to focus on rehabilitation.
Okay. So I hadn't seen any new member of council look for questions of staff on this report. And so therefore I need to deal with, as will be the will of council, moving in on debate and discussion, and not reflecting perhaps my own view of what should happen, but what council's view should be of what happens here. So I'll look for some advice from the clerk. We do not at this time have a motion on the floor. I have heard several members of council now identify an idea of deferral of a motion that is not currently on the floor. So I'm curious about how I would entertain such a deferral motion with that. Can I do that directly? Do I need a motion on the floor so someone can then move to defer it? How would I proceed?
Through you, Chair Henry, yes, I would get a motion on the floor, and if at that time that motion fails and another motion comes for deferral, then we'll deal with that at that time.
And one could defer a motion on the table as well. So I will take...
I'll move the motion.
I'll take Councillor Durrell and Mayor Jaworski to put it on the floor.
Small point of order, so you cannot defer the report?
That's not true. That's not what I heard.
Through you, Chair Henry. So the motion that's on the floor, that's what we're dealing with at this point, not... When looking at the motion, it deals with the report. Unless council wants to take it each individual recommendation on its own, but from what I understand, it's the recommendation as printed on the agenda.
So I'll interrupt here. In my interpretation of this, and as chair, I think that's helpful. We now have a motion on the floor because we can't entertain deferring something that ain't there to defer. So now there's something there to defer. Any member of council in debate can raise a motion to defer the entire motion, and then that's what we would be debating. So I have a mover and seconder on the main motion. I could ask them to speak to it if they wish to, and then I could entertain, I would go first to Councillor Maven since he was the first one to raise it, so that he could move a motion of deferral of all of that. If he achieves a seconder, then we're debating deferral rather than the main motion. Is that clear? So I think that's the closest I can get, given not quite according to our procedure bylaw, we start with questions rather than debate, but the way the procedure bylaw is written, we should always have the motion on the floor before anybody says anything about anything, and that's just not generally how we operate informally. So I'm trying to navigate the formal and informal here to make sure that we're fair. Okay, so I'll look to the mover or seconder if they want to speak to the main motion before I entertain others. Or I could do it in reverse order, and then I'll come to other speakers, and then we'll get the motion deferred. Mayor Jaworski, then Councillor Durrell.
Well, I think we've heard that word a number of times, rehabilitation. That's something that we need to do. And we also heard it's a blessing and a curse to have an award-winning asset management system. Because thanks to that, in my heart, kicking the can down the road is not an option at this point. We've seen that the asset management plan shows that the City of Waterloo infrastructure continues to erode on an annual basis. Not every 5 years, not every 10 years, but every single year. And we've seen the value of investments, particularly from grants in the stormwater pond, how that got us so far ahead, 30% ahead on our infrastructure assets, and I think that's important. And if we look at us as a council, we've come up with even new ideas here today. We've heard about this being a living document. It'll inform a future council. We talked about efficiencies, increasing the Waterloo North Hydro dividend, and also AMO. Things will happen within the provincial government in the coming years, and there might be some extra changes there that might be relevant to us and might again inform the future council. At this point in time, this council has, as I look around the room, decades of experience, decades. And I think it's important for us to know that if we look at this information and we say, you know, does this help in the rehabilitation? Yes. Does it bind a future council? There's nothing stopping a future council from reversing any reserve policies or anything like that. And as we see here, a lot balanced net to zero. And we'll also deal with, correct me if I'm wrong, but also the 2018 budget, which we set ourselves and may in fact have a surplus, and this will have an impact on the budget that we set. Much of these things are nice points to say, you know, it's a soft handoff, handing that baton to the next council to say, you know what, we've done the hard work, we've seen what the asset management plan says, we've seen what it forecasts, and we're not just going to do nothing for our last half year of council. We're actually going to do something that gets stuff done, and but leave the major decision-making point on how to fund it long-term to the next term of council, which I believe is appropriate. So with that, that's my support for this motion.
Councillor Durrell, then I'll go to Councillor Maven.
Thank you. Well, I have a little story too. I was one of the thousands of parents that sat in Rim Park this weekend watching their daughters play Ontario Volleyball Association. And my daughter just happened to be, lost all her matches, but that's beside the point. The fact is, we were sitting on one of the courts cheering on the local team, and all of a sudden, they called a timeout, and it's because the roof was leaking. And so we had to clear out and move to a different place. And I thought, oh gosh. And then of course, because it's the weekend, I'm reading my council report, which is what I do during my daughter's volleyball. And I'm looking at this, and the word that came out to me over and over again was the rehab. And I was like, boy, do we need a rehab up here. So I think for me, a big part of this, of moving this motion is, of course I'm not fancy about putting a levy on the people of Waterloo. I don't think it's a great idea, but at the same time, I think maybe we ask them. I mean, we've asked them if they want fluoride in the water. We asked them if they want to be a part of Kitchener. Maybe we asked them if they'd be interested in having additional levy. Maybe that's something. But at the same time, I'm listening to everybody else throw all these ideas out at our really smart accounting or finance department, and I think they probably have been whiteboarding this for, I don't know, like months and months and months, if not years. So I appreciate the fact that that's what you do, and what you do is put this report together so that we can read it. And pretty much, this was as Councillor Whaley put, a very fulsome report to digest. And so perhaps, maybe in the future, there's a little bit more about bringing us into this a little bit more kindly. Maybe one or two more crumbs before we get to this one. That might be a little bit helpful. But at the same time, this all makes sense to me. It's in the right direction. I think that it's appropriate to look at some of the ideas that came out. But I think we need to continue to move this forward. And part of our job isn't to say, well, we'll have to wait and see what the next council says. Because frankly, as we all know, when you start on council, it is like going on a Black Diamond Hill with your first time on a snowboard. So I think it is part of our responsibility to set up that next council for success. And there's nothing in here that's going to, there's no anything hidden in here that's going to make them scared. This is just good financial planning, which, as behind Councillor Henry's head, says stability. There's no risk here. We're just moving nicely along, right? Like, that's pretty much how I would, at the end of the day, this is what this report looks like. So I'm happy to see this continue forward.
So as I stated, I'll go to Councillor Maven, who, if he has a motion for deferral, he should say it up front, and we can get that wordsmithed and seconded.
We're still in questions. I have some questions or statements to make. One is, not one comment was made that we didn't need rehab. Not one question was, nothing questioned the fact that we have to find money for maintenance and making that a priority. So I'm not sure where the mover and seconder are coming from totally. Other than I feel for your daughter. You know, that was no good thing. Yeah. One thing that Councillor Whaley said that resonated was being a leader at times is not the right thing to do. If you recall, on the LRT, when it was approved by the region, and the region put in, I think, $900 million, then the province turned around and gave, Region of York, Hamilton, will pay 100% of your LRT. So being the leader didn't really help. I'm sure the regional chair is going to come back and he's going to equalize things at some point in time in the future. But when it came to that expenditure, being the leader it's too bad. It's going to cost the local taxpayers $900 million. So be it. So all we were looking for in the comments was simply, let's find other ways of creating revenue for the city, not just fall back on the tried and true raise taxes. That's all I heard the comments say. And with that, I'd like to move to defer this report to the next council, because there are implications in this council, because there's directions of staff as far as how to prepare the next budget. And that's the budget the next council will be dealing with. And trying to get that off the table so that this council doesn't say to the next council, I'm sorry, but we've already approved it. And no counselor can tell me that when staff say this is council-approved policy, that council doesn't listen, because they do. Thank you.
So I heard a motion to defer to the next council, which I think is a time frame. Is there a seconder for Councillor Maven's motion for deferral? That would be Councillor Burke. Okay, and I'll take Councillor Maven as already having spoken on his motion. And so now the only item that we can debate is whether or not one should defer or not. You can't debate the main motion. That's not what's before us. The only thing that's debatable now is whether or not the deferral as presented is appropriate or not.
So may I do a quickie here? Because I think we were elected to do 4 years, and many of the decisions that we're going to make over the next 5 or 6 months are going to affect that next council. So, that's part of our job. And I think, that's all I've got to say.
Madam Clerk?
Chair Henry, just to confirm, the motion to defer to the next term of council, as far as the timing, is this something you want dealt with during the 2019 budget process or the 2020 to 2022 budget process?
I'll look to the mover, but Councillor Maven, I might infer that you don't want to tell the next council when they should deal with this, and so you don't want to be more specific than what's already before us.
Staff have already indicated they plan on use some of the items that are in this report in the 2019 budget process. But I agree with Councillor Henry, or Chair Henry's comments, in that, the next council will sort it out.
I'm sure that'll be fun for the CAO and his staff to figure out, but I was right on my guess. Okay. So I've had Councillor Maven on his motion, Councillor Durrell on that motion. Other speakers on this motion? Councillor Freeman?
Through Chair Henry. So I am on the fence on this one. The mayor and Councillor Joel have made some concise arguments, and I can see where this current motion doesn't fetter a future council. So I do understand that. I will point out that the table in section 3.1 refers to an OMB hearing, and since an OMB no longer resides in Ontario, we might want to change that to approvals hearings, but that's just a small note. So I guess I just wanted to signal that intention to Mr. Maven to say that I'm kind of reconsidering this notion of deferral.
Okay, next I have Mayor Jaworski.
Thank you. I can't support the deferral for the reasons I stated earlier, simply because, we're 85% of our council term done. We can't take the last 15% off. That's not appropriate. And I think there's no other group that's better suited to make this decision here today on the tidying up of our financial plan, ensuring we send a message that to the citizens of Waterloo that we understand that things, we have all the knowledge in the world. We can't stick our head in the sand like an ostrich. That shows that things aren't going to get any better. And taking another year to say we don't even want to look at it through our term of council. Next term of council, when they first get started, we want to give you this heavy lifting that even we couldn't decide after all our years of experience. I think that is not appropriate. I think it's all things being equal, like I said, we work as a team throughout all the terms of council, and I think this is something that we need to look after. Is any report that we see perfect? No, it's not. But this has a lot of great ideas in it, and it really helps the future of the city of Waterloo.
Other speakers on the motion to defer? Councillor Burke?
And to be clear to Councillor Maven, I seconded that, so we have an opportunity to talk about it in the context of where we are. And as somebody who stepped into this 3.5 years ago, right into that budget process, it is a very, very, very difficult situation. It was a time when I leaned on Councillor Maven to explain to me what some of these things mean. And so one of the things that resonated with me was Councillor Freeman earlier talking about we need to think differently. People want us to think differently. And I think whatever group is around this table in 6 months will be able to do that. I don't see that anything particularly ties anyone to do anything except for the tendency of the Titanic to go in a certain direction. And if you've only got one paddle, it's really hard to move it away from the iceberg. So I think there's a tendency to go with the group. And, but I wanted to have that discussion because I thought it was important to see where people are on it. I don't particularly think that people are going to be forced into certain decisions, but I wanted to have that discussion, Councilor Maven. I'm glad we did. But I'm, again, it's very uncomfortable on the fence this afternoon. And, but it's a good place to be able to question what you've been thinking all along. So that was the reason I seconded it. And I think, as many other councillors have said, it is important to move this forward. But, you know, as a person who was armpits deep in it 3.5 years ago in that particular situation, maybe being unfair to people at that point, we need to maybe move it along a little bit.
Councillor Worley?
I just have a point of order.
Oh, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's with respect to what we're voting on now. We're voting, this vote will be on, because I'm also on the fence, it's a really, really crowded fence. There's a lot of people swinging on this fence. We're voting on whether or not to approve a referral or to reject a referral. Is that what we're, deferral, that's what we're voting on?
Yeah. So the question is, should this report be referred or deferred, the language doesn't matter, to the next council at a time indeterminate in the next council, but no doubt it'll be relatively early, or not. If the decision is not, then we go back to the main motion, which is the one that's printed. So, any other debate on that item?
Can I speak to it, sir?
To defer, you spoke to it when moving. But I look to the clerk for how we deal with those, because I don't.
Generous in terms of debating the borough I've ever seen.
I'm happy to give you a brief wrap-up if you let me say something first on the item, since I haven't debated anything. So I agree with the mayor and others. Deferring this report to the next council, I don't believe will be helpful. The perfect is the enemy of the good, and I think, quite frankly, we've been kicking this can so far down the road. We need to replace the can now too, and I think that's a challenge for us. And I'd like to start to chip away at this as councils have done for the last 3 councils, really. And if we get back to debate, I'll itemize how those have been done and how we've incremented towards progress. Councillor Maven, brief wrap up, then we'll take the vote on the deferral.
Okay, just one of the comments about the fact that there's nothing here that really impacts what will happen, and there is. I already did a report, and there's all kinds of things that will impact what happens to the next year's budget. The reducing the CRF between operating and capital is major. You're approving taking money that's spent on capital, new capital, fine, according to the new definition, but it's capital that can be used for a lot of purposes. And this report says, no, we're going to take that and we're going to split it up between operating and capital. So we're going to reduce our funds for capital. Okay, that's in here. The fact that we're setting the stage, and that's what you're doing. You're setting the stage for because everything you do from a staff point of view tends to be incremental. If you get this one, this one, this one, then they all add up to the final thing, and all of a sudden you back yourself into a corner, and you end up having a conclusion, yes, okay, that makes sense. I did the same thing, so I know how it's done. But the fact that you don't see this as an important step, other than just the fact we're moving things around and we're not tying council's hands, we're not doing anything, that disturbs me a little bit. I personally resent because I guess I'm a little bit defensive, the fact that I'm saying we do nothing as a council for the rest of the year. I think that's not fair, not at all. We're dealing with this issue, not what council is going to do for the rest of the term. So it's not kicking a can, it's not doing anything, it's doing something. Thank you.
Okay, with that, I'll take the vote on deferring to the next council. All those in favor of deferral? All those opposed to deferral? Give the clerk, clerk saw that. Okay, so we're back to the main motion, and next on my speakers list on the main motion is Councillor Burke.
Well, again, I'm back on the fence. I just feel, and I don't for a minute, Councilor Maven, think that you're suggesting council do nothing for the rest of the year. I really don't believe that. I'm agree with many things, as another councilor suggested, that we do, that does impact the next council in many ways. So I think I just came to the point where it's just important to get this discussion out there. I think the easy headline is, council approves plan for tax levy, which none of us really want to see. But again, I stick with what others have said, is that there needs to be a new way of doing things. Not just this level of government, it's every level of government, obviously. You can't continue to milk the cow that much. And it's been done a long time. People are struggling. Maybe we're not among them, but there are a lot of people that are struggling. And that extra $20, that extra $40, it adds up. And we need to find a better way to do it. And whether it's this council or the next council or the one after it, that's got to be an overriding way to do it. But this gets the discussion out there. And if there is a need to change the way that the next council looks at it and says, you know what, that was a stupid thing that they did, they should change that, then I hope that they'll have the ability to do that. But I'm going to go with this because obviously I was in a place today too where the ceiling collapsed. It was a private sector one. So it's out there, and we need to be aware of it, and we need to take steps.
Which is convenient. You had to come here early. I've had Mayor Jaworski, Councillor Durrell, Councillor Maven, and Councillor Burke on this item so far. Others? Councillor Whaler?
Not too much to say that already hasn't been said. This morning I went for a walk at the rec center. I do that a couple times a week, go for a walk at the rec center, especially when the weather's bad. And this morning at the rec center, there were 10 garbage cans on the track as the rain went plunk, plunk, plunk onto the track. So it was so interesting to see, experience that this morning, and then come here and have this debate this afternoon. And it was that slap in the face this morning as I saw our constituents winding their way around the buckets on the track that will have me support this motion.
Councillor Veith?
Quick story and little release here. There was a leak in the library in McCormick branch over the weekend, so it's going to be closed for a couple of days. So happy to support this.
And I'll wrap up. I think there's been a lot of good discussion. Every time we talk about this, there's a lot of good discussion. And pens are taking notes because all of it's helpful. All of it's helpful in getting us closer to where we need to be as a city. This isn't the first time that councils around this table have made decisions to get us closer to where we need to go. Back in 2009, council approved a new policy around assessment growth, which for the first time was setting aside 20 cents of every dollar towards the new capital infrastructure reinvestment reserve fund. The subsequent council added a policy so that 25% of any surplus would go, again, towards that reinvestment reserve fund. And this council already has rebalanced its reserve funds and reserve funds policy to be more transparent about what we're funding and where and how, and to consolidate these reserve funds that act almost as a bit of an insurance policy against these kinds of literally rainy day events. And by pooling the risk, it allows us to minimize the amount we have to keep in those reserves to keep the city running and meeting those targets. The one more thing that this council can do before the next council is before us today. It can take a look at both of the actions we've taken before and double down on those to put even more aside for infrastructure reserve and make sure that where we're spending our money deals with the fact that the vast majority of the services and the roads and the infrastructure that we will have in 2042, we have today. And it's not getting any younger. And so we do need to deal with this, and this allows us to increment towards that process and let the next council make an important decision about how we deal with the gap within a model that provides us better visibility than we've ever had before about where we're going and what the impacts are going to be, so we can make better decisions at budget time, better informed decisions at budget time. So if you put your hand up for something, you know where it's going and you know how it influences everything that we're going to be doing in the next 25 years. It's a heads up, eyes open solution opportunity for every single thing that comes forward to us. And so I think that is helpful for where we're going today. And the most important conversation we'll have wasn't had over the last few months earlier this year with the public, which began the conversation around infrastructure. The most important conversation this community is going to have on infrastructure is in the next 8 months. And we've provided, through the heavy work of staff over the last several years, the information that I think the public needs to know what the gap is, what the challenges are, and what some of the ways of getting there can do for us. And that starts what I hope will be an excellent conversation that puts the next council in a strong position to make a decision that will not be an easy decision, but has to be a decision. So with that, I think we've all had time on this item. I'll call the question. All those in favor? All those opposed? Councillor Maven. Thank you. Good discussion. Next up, we have yada, yada, yada. Any new business, council? Seeing none. Any questions, council? Seeing none. Councillor Wiley?
I just wanted to extend a personal note of thanks to the staff members who worked to put together such a great plan for the faux storm. The storm didn't come, but it was expected to be an epic storm, and we were so lucky to have dodged a bullet. But even though we did dodge the bullet, a lot of work had to be done, and it gave us a good glimpse at the steps that we take to prepare ourselves at every level of the organization for such an outcome, and I'm thankful it didn't happen, but I'm also thankful for all the work that went in by staff to keep our citizens safe.
I think that's wholly appropriate, and I think everybody can take that back to the teams. We were ready for the worst, and the worst wasn't as bad, and happened a little bit later than we thought, as it turns out, for some of it, and people were still digging out this morning and the rest of the day. I should also, while we're paused, note that this week is National Volunteer Week. And it has been since 1943 in recognition of the efforts of volunteers to the war effort during that Second Great War. While in Canada, about just under 13% of the population volunteers, apparently here in Waterloo region, nearly half of citizens here over the age of 15 does volunteer, and that includes thousands in various city programs that help to make the city an even better place and the great place that it is. So during this week of April 15th to 21st, please take the opportunity to during the next week, I think, to take volunteers in your organization for their service and their commitment. Without volunteers, nothing is possible. Okay. With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Councillor Beath, Councillor Burke, all those in favor? That's carried.